A billabong is an Australian term, has to do with the little eddies that form on the sides of rivers. It's the little sections of water that spin around and in time stagnate, and they're no longer a part of the flow of the river. We recognize that there are many associations between a billabong and a lot of prayer that is being done by Christians. Well-meaning, yes, but it still isn't a part of the main flow of the wonderful rescue story that's flowing out of heaven, going to the lost and painful edges of our world as they're stuck off to the side. Jesus actually, in Matthew 6, tried to address some prayer missteps. There's a lot of ways to pray right. There's some ways to pray wrong. One of them has to do with being a show-off. He says, when you pray, don't be like the show-offs who love to stand in the meeting places and street corners just to look good. I think that's funny wording. And don't talk on and on. After all, Jesus knows, the Father knows exactly what you need before you ask. But don't talk on and ramble on and on like others do. These are just examples of efforts of prayer that actually don't gain the traction of the kingdom that is desperately needed today, especially in this time where the church is losing such abilities at expanding. We're good with those we've already reached, and we can't seemingly reach new people. We're stuck in that kind of spot. Acts 19 is another interesting place where the 7 sons of a Jewish priest by the name of Sceva saw what some of Jesus' disciples were doing and what the apostles were doing in the ability to cast out demons. And so they came, thought they would try their hand at it, and suddenly found out they were underpowered for that activity. I think that speaks as well to many in the church today. We have learned our versions of prayer in our churches that are on the supply line of the faith, not necessarily the front lines. Then we get out to the front lines and find, wow, I don't know how to pray at the level that's necessary to stay out here. And that 7 sons of Sceva lesson is kind of revisiting us. Another one out of Matthew 26 that is kind of sobering though, is Jesus' time in the Garden of Gethsemane. And of course, he'd invited his disciples to come, and he said, can you not wait with me? Just wait with me here. My soul is grievous, is challenged. And there he prayed, but his disciples fell asleep. And he came back and stirred them again, but they were just simply too tired. And then, of course, when the moment of darkness came, that moment of distress where in an instant, they were now being arrested. And then, of course, the disciples that weren't powered up, so to speak, their prayer was not ready for the sudden front lines of the gospel that they were now on. They stood up and they reacted and they ran and they denied and they cut people's ears off. They simply were not ready for the moment, that front lines moment that suddenly was upon them. And church, most of our churches, unfortunately, have devolved back to treating people and raising up people to be good Christ followers. It's like we're maturing the alreadys, but we have lost our traction with the not yets. The secular population that now outnumbers the Judeo population in our nation has caused the church by definition to be functioning on the supply line, and we've lost our way to the front lines. Just our manner of church assumes that we're maturing the saints way more than we are reaching the difficult and reaching the lost, those that have difficult lives. And so consequently, our prayer lives have devolved as well. We have slipped down to a place where our prayers are more self-focused. The supply line creates a certain vision of prayer that out on the front lines, well, it brings about a different necessity altogether. And when the church spends its time behind its stained glass walls, singing, he's got the whole world in his hands, which is kind of true, but yet without our engagement in prayer, not really. There's some theological errors with that song if you look at it holistically. That's when we slip into a passive form of Christianity, and with that comes a passive, self-serving focus on prayer rather than the fiery warriors capable of resisting evil, kicking in the front door of the strongman and rescuing the people whom he has oppressed as a basic part of our Christian experience. This is where much of the church finds themselves today. In fact, I think I could bluntly say that most U.S. Christians are overly practiced at humble, passive prayers and under-practiced at bold, authoritative prayers. I don't really know how it happened, but a false humility kind of came across the church in the past 50 years, where a bold, firm prayer got set aside and we became fearful that we might not be praying in God's will. And we've got to change everything to, if it be your will, and this passive, submissive kind of prayer, when in fact, what is needed for those on the front lines is those that will stand up and practice an authoritative, bold, expectant kind of prayer that, man, if I'm going to knock on heaven's door, I'm going to expect something to happen. And that's the kind of spot that many in the body of Christ are in. And I want to invite you to take a real good look at your prayer life. Are you worried about praying a little bit too authoritarian? I want to invite you to stop worrying about that. Trust me, Jesus isn't bothered that you might tell him what to do. He's more concerned that you might not pick up the authority that he has given in a way that would allow your prayer life to become bold and become something that fits on the front lines. What do you honestly think about setting aside a passive prayer, setting aside passive tones, setting them behind you, and instead learning to pray authoritative prayers, and what authoritative, bold prayers actually sound like coming out of your mouth?